Hello Star Wars fans, and welcome to episode 55 of Journey into Legends. Today we are going to be reading books 7 through 12 of the Galaxy of Fear series by John Whitman. Galaxy of Fear is a series of 12 children's novels released from 1997 to 1998, heavily inspired by R.L. Stine's Goosebumps series. Last episode I read and reviewed the first half of this series, and I really enjoyed those first 6 books, so I'm super excited to jump back into this series. Without further ado, let's read and review. Alright, so the 7th book is called The Brain Spiders, and takes place in Jabba's palace as Hool and the kids try to lay low from the Empire. For the most part, this book was fairly average compared to the others in the series. However, I did really enjoy the third act of this book. Basically, what happens is Jabba helps a criminal named Carcass escape Imperial justice by transferring his brain into Tash's body and giving his old body to the Imperials. So for a good chunk of this book, Tash's body is inhabited by Carcass, while Tash's brain is placed into one of the brain spiders. And I just found this whole plot point extremely gross but super fun, and it honestly saved the book for me. For the first half of this book, I was anticipating this being one of my least favorites thus far, but after that twist, the book became a lot more fun. Overall, even though the twist ended up salvaging the book, it's still one of the weaker books in the series, in my opinion, for a few reasons. Firstly, I think Jabba's palace is a pretty boring setting compared to some of the planets we've visited in the other books. Also, I really did not like Tash in this book. She was being unnecessarily rude towards Zack, and she bought into the whole Biomar monk propaganda way too easily. Finally, the omission of DV9 was a disappointment. He wasn't my favorite character of all time, but I liked the overall dynamic between him, Hool, Zack, and Tash, and omitting him seems kind of pointless, so I hope we haven't seen the last of him. Anyways, let's move on to Book 8. Alright, so next we have Book 8 titled The Swarm, and in this one, Hool and the kids go to the planet Skur to visit a place called the Circadian Gardens. Why? Well, there's no particular reason other than to lay low from the Empire once more. Anyways, the story in this book revolves around a species of beetles on the planet called Drogs, and a species called Shreves, and these two species basically coexist, and there's a balance between them that must be maintained, or else the Drogs will begin to reproduce too fast and overrun the entire planet, which is of course exactly what happens. Anyways, I thought this whole plotline was a little boring. I didn't think the beetles were that creepy, and I didn't buy the tension that the book tried to create using them. However, one thing I really loved about this book was the familiar character that popped up. In this one, it is none other than Grand Admiral Thrawn, or rather, Captain Thrawn at this time, which is great. I loved seeing Thrawn at this time in his career, and I thought this was a fairly faithful portrayal of his character. Definitely the highlight of the book for me. Overall, this is definitely one of the weaker books in my opinion. Like I said, the plot was quite boring, and there wasn't much character development for any of the main characters, although like I said, I loved seeing Thrawn in this one. Anyways, let's move on to Book 9. Alright, next we have Book 9, simply titled Spore, and once again, in true Galaxy of Fear fashion, the first 2 acts of this book were pretty slow and boring, but like always, it got really good in the third act. Now this one takes place on Ithor, as well as a mining colony in a nearby asteroid field. Personally, I found the setting of this book really boring, and like I said when I was reviewing Young Jedi Knights way back when, in these short little kids books, the setting can either make or break a book for me, and this time around, well, I already said how I feel. Anyways, the whole book is pretty much a mystery about this ancient tomb inside of the asteroid, what was inside of it, and as people start dying and explosions start going off, the mystery becomes a sort of murder mystery, which, to be honest, I wasn't very invested in. But like I said, this book got really good at the end as we learn what actually was inside of the tomb, and it was a parasite called Spore that it starts infecting pretty much everyone, including Zack and Hool. Anyways, I thought the way Spore was written and the way it infected its victims made this part of the book really creepy and really fun to read. Another really awesome aspect is the cameo character. Last time, of course, we had Thrawn, which was great. This time, however, we have Jarek from Dark Forces. Now, interestingly enough, this is actually my introduction to the character, since I haven't played the games, and I'm actually only reading the novellas next episode. but I just thought that including him here was a really cool choice. I love seeing authors bring some relatively obscure characters into their stories. Anyways, this was definitely one of the weakest books in the series, but again, it wasn't the worst thing in the world. Anyways, let's move on to book 10. Alright, so the next book we have is book 10, titled The Doomsday Ship. And in this one, Hool and the kids take a vacation on the cruise ship Star of Empire. And of course, very quickly things go wrong when suddenly the alarms go off and the ship is evacuated. But in the chaos, Zack and Tash end up trapped on the ship with the book's guest star, this time being Dash Rendar, of course from Shadows of the Empire. Anyways, it turns out that the one behind the evacuation and everything else that goes wrong on the ship is a computer program called Sim. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. It gave me a Home Alone meets 2001: A Space Odyssey meets Children of the Jedi vibe, and was actually a lot of fun. Compared to the other books in this series, this book felt a lot more succinct and well-structured than the rest. I loved seeing Dash Rendar pop up again, and I surprisingly didn't mind the omission of Hool this time around, and I enjoyed Sim as a villain. Anyways, let's move on to book 11, the second to last book in the series. Alright, so book 11, the penultimate book in the series, is called Clones, and to be honest, this is the only book so far that I actually disliked. Basically, this one takes place on Dantooine as Hool and the kids continue to lay low from the Empire, and this is where Tash discovers a hidden cloning facility beneath some ancient Jedi ruins. And soon there's an army of Zack clones, Tash clones, there's a Hool clone, there's even a Darth Vader clone that leads the pack. Anyways, I really did not like this clone plotline. I thought it was a bit too ridiculous for my tastes, and it does not jive very well with other depictions of cloning in Legends, whether it be Kaminoan or Sparty cloning. There were some things I liked about this book. Although I didn't like the cloning plotline, I did enjoy the climactic battle when Hool battled his clone and Vader showed up and battled his. I also enjoyed the character of Maga, whose name is a bit recontextualized in today's society, but I'm not going to talk about that. Anyways, he was a cool character with some good development. Something that helped enhance this book for me as well was to picture the Jedi runes during those scenes as the Jedi Enclave from KOTOR. Obviously, that wasn't the original intention since this book came out first, but that simple bit of headcanon really enhanced the reading experience. But overall, this book is still my least favorite of the series, and again, the only one that I ended up actually disliking overall. Anyways, let's move on to book 12, the final book in the series. Well, here we are, book 12, the final book of the series, titled The Hunger. In this one, Hool and the kids go to Dagobah to hide from the Empire. Along with them is a group of smugglers led by a woman named Platt O'Keefe, who is a character from the Adventure Journals. As someone who's never read those, this cameo didn't really affect my enjoyment of this book. Some other cameos in this book include Boba Fett, who's now hunting Zack, Tash, and Hool, and of course because we're on Dagobah, Yoda also shows up in this one. Anyways, when they get to Dagobah, they find a village where they stay for a while until they learn that the villagers are cannibals and have not only been eating their own, but also some of Platt's smugglers as well. I really loved this plotline. Although the plot twist was extremely obvious from the start, it was still pretty dark for a kid's book and fairly well executed. I also think this book did a great job of concluding the series as a whole. I thought Yoda, whose portrayal, by the way, was really great, served as a great catalyst for both Zack and Tash's character development. We also saw the return of DV9, which was great. I was a bit annoyed that he was written out of the series in book 7, but I'm glad he was brought back for the final book. Overall, this book was a good finale and one of my personal favorites of the entire series. So overall, Galaxy of Fear was an absolute blast, and so much better than it had any right to be. I really love the characters of Zack, Tash, Hool, and DV9, and it's a real shame they don't appear more in the later EU. This series also had fantastic continuity with the greater EU, whether it's the inclusion of fun cameos from fan favorites like Thrawn, Jarek, or Dash Rendar, or just its cognizance of other EU stories, like a mention of Labria, which maintains continuity with Boba Fett and his adventures in Tales of the Bounty Hunters. Personally, I found the first half of this series a lot more enjoyable than the second. The inclusion of a main villain in Borborygmus Gog allowed for a more consistent and enjoyable storyline, whereas I feel that the second half lacked direction, and thus the stories felt a bit more flat and forgettable compared to books 1 through 6. Either way, though, I've thoroughly enjoyed this series from beginning to end, and I think it's severely underrated. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Look out for more Galaxy of Fear coverage with a book review coming soon, and stay tuned for my next review where I'll be reading the Dark Forces novellas by William C. Deitz. See ya.